The Los Angeles Rams had a pretty good season in 2024, all things considered. They were down both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua for 5+ game stretches last year, and even when Cooper Kupp came back to the field, things were just not completely 100% for him physically. Through this, the Rams still statistically were a good team throwing the ball, and this was needed given the fact that LA was 31st in yards per rushing attempt. Now, I won't blame much of that on Kyren Williams for this number, as his 1,299 yards on the ground was the 7th highest number in the league. I think more about this number can be attributed to the fact that those two receivers I highlighted at the beginning missed a lot of time, and opposing teams knew the Rams were going to try to run the ball more during that time frame. However, after Kyren Williams, there was little to no production in the backfield. And it felt like at this time last year, the guy everybody in the media was talking about was the newly drafted running back Blake Corum out of Michigan. And after 1 year, he produced a measly 207 rushing yards on a well below average 3.6 yards per attempt. The Rams also were tied for the 7th least amount of rushing yards before contact per attempt last year. And given how slight that Kyren Williams is and that Corum is a young player, that number, the yards before contact, needs to improve for the Rams to be able to improve their running attack. Now, the defense is where the Rams get extremely fun to talk about. There are 2 to 3 young playmakers at basically every single position group on this defense that stepped up last year and made play after play. Braden Fisk and Jaron Verse were just 2 of the really young, incredible pass rushers on this team last year, and they provided value in the run game as well. Cameron Kitchens, Jalen McCullough, Quentin Lake, and Cameron Curl all were great pieces in the secondary, and each guy provided versatility in the run game as well as against the pass. There's honestly so much youth on this team, and there was so much youth on this team last year that it's hard to name everyone, and it's hard to name all of the stats that these guys put up last year. And while they were young and while they were fun last year, the best part is that there is still a lot for this team to improve on defensively. They were 21st in sacks last year. They were 26th in yards per attempt allowed against both the pass and the run. And they were 17th in points allowed. So again, even though I love this group and I love how they've been put together in terms of how the front office have put this team together, there's still a lot of room for improvement. Now, going into 2025, the Rams will be losing some of their homegrown talent through free agency, as Bobby Brown, Mike Hoyt, and Christian Roseboom all were significant pieces on the squad for the last few years, and they are moving on to new teams. In their place, the Rams got a couple of vets in free agency to try to aid in their defensive improvement. Poona Ford comes in from the LA Chargers to get some interior presence, and Nathan Landman comes in from Atlanta to handle the inside linebacker spot next to Omar Spates, who was yet another extremely young contributor last year on this defense. The draft will likely not yield similar results to last year's group, as there's only 3 guys coming to this team, whereas you look at last year's draft, there was like 4 or 5 guys by like round 5 that were already drafted by the defense. You do have the additions of Josiah Stewart and Ty Hamilton in the front, and then you have Chris Paul Jr. coming in as a currently backup linebacker, and each of these guys has been seeing backup snaps in training camp so far. All 3 of these guys got some good playing time in their first preseason game against the Cowboys, and Josiah Stewart landed a sack against Joe Milton in that game. Moving to the offense and what they are going to be losing in 2025, it's the obvious wide receiver duo of Cooper Kupp and Demarcus Robinson that is the talking point. Both of these guys leave after having Cooper Kupp's case, one of the better starts to a career for a receiver we've seen. And Demarcus Robinson, he was kind of the guy that was like their one-on-one threat, especially in contested catch, red zone situations Both of these guys are going to leave a void, and both of these guys provided great play for the Rams, not just last year, but for a long time, especially in Cooper Kupp's case. Taking over across from Puka Nacua is going to be Davante Adams. He comes over from the New York Jets on a 2-year, $44 million deal. This team also gets Coleman Shelton, DJ Humphries, and David Quessenberry to be either starters on the offensive line or guys that can just be good depth pieces. And overall, I think this offense does get a little bit better. I know losing Cooper Kupp is going to suck. And just off the fact that he had a great rapport with Matthew Stafford, him and Puka Nacua seemed to be able to have a great chemistry together when they were on the field. But it's just kind of one of those things in the NFL. You end up losing somebody usually along the way that you really don't want to lose. But things happen. And I think you do have to give the Rams credit. They lost Cooper Kupp. They lost DeMarcus Robinson. But they got a guy in Davante Adams who kind of can fill both of the roles that each of those guys had last year. Cooper Kupp is a guy who one-on-one situations can, kind of win at any given rate. Davante Adams can do the exact same thing. DeMarcus Robinson last year was a guy one-on-one situations, throw the ball up, and he'll go high point it. Davante Adams can do the exact same thing. So it's going to be exciting to see him in this offense with Puka Nacua, Tutu Atwell, and as well as the draft pick in this year's draft for the LA Rams, tight end Terrence Ferguson out of Oregon. It was a bit of a shock to people that the LA Rams, I guess, not that they took Terrence Ferguson, but they felt so good about him that they kind of came out and said, we would have taken him in the first round if we didn't have the great opportunity to get Atlanta's first round pick next year. And I think when you look at it from that aspect as well, LA kind of won the draft because even though they traded out of the first round, Atlanta's draft pick next year, while it might not be in the top 5, there's a very good chance Atlanta is not a playoff team next year. There's a very good chance Atlanta is not a winning team next year. And that first round pick for LA could be in the top 15, top 10 possibly. But getting back to Terrence Ferguson and what he brings to this offense, there really hasn't been a real big name tight end coming out of college for the LA Rams in a long time. I mean, the guys who have kind of held down the tight end spot for the Rams over the last few years, you have guys like Tyler Higbee. You have guys that, while they make impacts for the team, they don't really push the envelope. They don't make this team great on offense. They're not focal points. They're not major pieces. The hope with Terrence Ferguson coming in is that he's a guy that can help not just now with, Matthew Stafford, but he's going to build up the younger core on this offense, much like the defense has been built up the last few years. You have a young core on your offense with now Terrence Ferguson. You have Puka Nacua, who's only 25 years old. You have Kyron Williams and Blake Corum, who both are only 25 years old. And all are pretty, they've got pretty team-friendly contracts. So it's a move that's good for now and for the future with that draft pick of Terrence Ferguson. Now, moving to the schedule for the LA Rams this year, it's a pretty good mixture of teams that are probably better than the Rams and a good mixture of teams that, the Rams should have a good chance at beating. Early in the season, you have your tougher opponents like the Texans, Eagles, Niners, and Ravens. These are all teams who are going to be really either trying to repeat as division winners or come back from a tough season and prove that 2024 was kind of a blip on the radar, especially for a team like the San Francisco 49ers. I don't know how the situation with Matt Stafford is really going to play out for the Rams, and with that, I kind of hold a grain of salt when I say this team could go like 5-12 next year. This year, I should say. This team could be at the bottom of the division if Matt Stafford isn't playing. I don't know if Stetson Bennett is really ready to be the guy to take this team through however many games needed. We know Jimmy Garoppolo isn't the guy. We know. We've known Jimmy Garoppolo isn't the guy. And so I think if it needs to get turned over to a quarterback that's not Matt Stafford, we see it probably go to Stetson Bennett at some point. And I just, I just don't know if that's a recipe for success for LA. If Stafford is healthy the entire season, this team could win 10 or 11 games again. They could win the NFC West again. They could be a team, they were kind of the team when you look at the Eagles' run to winning the Super Bowl last year. The Rams were kind of the team that gave them their toughest match in the playoffs. And I really think, if that game wasn't a blizzard, it wasn't that snowy, but if it wasn't as snowy as it was in Philadelphia on that day, there's a chance LA possibly comes away from that game with a win and possibly is going against the Commanders for a chance to represent the NFC in the Super Bowl last year. But again, this all hinges on Matt Stafford and whether or not his back is healthy enough for him to even start the season. And even if he starts the season, this offensive line isn't perfect. They have guys that could be targeted. They're going to go against some pretty good defensive lines throughout the year. They're going to go against some teams that can bring a pass rush, especially that Week 1 game on the road against the Houston Texans when you have Will Anderson and Danielle Hunter on opposite sides of each other. You go to Philly 2 weeks later, who always has a great defense. It's just going to be tough for me to see the LA Rams make it through this 2025 season without maybe us seeing Matt Stafford on the bench for a few games. And again, if that happens, I could really see this season going south for the LA Rams.